So picture the last big meeting you were in. Or if you're a student or a teacher, think about your last classroom experience.
Right, just a typical day.
Yeah, exactly. You walk in, grab a seat, maybe open your laptop or your notebook, and the person leading the room stands at the front, clears their throat, and the conversation just kicks off.
And on the surface, it probably looked like a completely neutral, standard gathering of human beings.
Totally. You just assume everyone has an equal opportunity to speak, to be seen, and, to contribute.
Right, you assume it's just a level playing field.
But what if I told you there was an entirely invisible layer of architecture in that room? Like a silent, running algorithm that's dictating exactly who gets to speak, who gets looked at, and who just naturally absorbs all the power in the space.
And the crazy part is, it's happening without a single person actively trying to make it happen.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to pull back the curtain on how these deeply ingrained, really unconscious behaviors absolutely dominate our learning and working environments.
We walk into these spaces assuming the exchange of ideas is, like a pure meritocracy, right?
Yeah, the best idea wins.
Exactly. The assumption is always that the best ideas will naturally float to the top, regardless of who presents them. But the data reveals a completely different reality.
It really does, which is why we are taking a hard look today at how making this invisible architecture visible can radically shift the power dynamics in any room you walk into.
That invisible architecture is entirely predictable, and it heavily favors certain demographics while, honestly, systematically throttling others.
And the source material we are pulling from today is just incredibly compelling. We've got this stack of personal reflections compiled by John Novick. It's based on his consultation with a New York educator and consultant named Audrey Halpern.
Right, and it's titled Some Research Findings on Gender Equity and Education and What You Can Do About It.
Yes. And what makes this specific document so vital is that Novick deliberately selected it for inclusion in his ongoing America Actually series.
Which is such a great series. It's really dedicated to cutting through the noise, just looking at the functional reality of how we interact as a society.
Yeah, get right down to the psychological core of those interactions. But before we go any further, we really need to set a firm baseline for you, the listener.
Yes, this is crucial.
The source document makes this explicitly clear right out of the gate. There's nothing inherently political about these findings. We are looking at a synthesis of quantitative and qualitative research into human behavior, period.
Right. Gender is simply a fundamental categorization tool that human beings use. We all use it to process the world around us.
But without recognizing our unconscious, culturally rooted assumptions about gender, we simply cannot create communities or workplaces that actually benefit everyone.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because by the end of this deep dive, you will never look at a seating chart or like a simple interruption in a meeting the exact same way again.
No, you really won't. So, to understand how to fix the dynamics of a room, we first have to look at who is actually taking up the oxygen in it.
And the data on verbal participation provides a really stark starting point for that.
Yeah, across the board, the research shows that self-identified males generally speak more often, they speak for significantly longer periods of time, and they are much more inclined to interrupt someone else who is speaking.
The notes actually describe this as a conditioned sense of urgency or importance.
Right, it's like this assumption that whatever thought just materialized in their brain is critical.
Yes. And that it just must be shared with the room immediately. It entirely bypasses any internal filter that might tell them to, hold back or let someone else finish.
Conversely, self-identified females, regardless of their age or their professional standing, generally speak less frequently and use fewer words.
And the mechanism behind this is where it gets really telling.
Yeah, explain that part.
So females will often apologize or express self-doubt when speaking. They'll say things like, I might be wrong here, but... Sorry, just a quick thought.
Even when they aren't actually wrong.
Exactly. Even when they don't actually feel any internal doubt about the information they're sharing, they are actively conditioning their language to soften the impact of their voice.
It makes me think of, like, your home Wi-Fi network. It's like the router in the room is automatically programmed to give 80% of the bandwidth to certain devices and heavily throttle the connection to others.
That's a great way to put it.
And it happens without anyone ever logging into the admin settings to authorize it. The males in the room are automatically granted the bandwidth.
And the safety statistics tied to this distribution of bandwidth are just staggering because the underlying feeling of safety dictates who actually uses that bandwidth.
Right.
Statistically, males nearly always report feeling safe, confident, and even a sense of superiority when they are the only male in a room.
Which is wild. Even when they're completely outnumbered by female peers, their baseline internal feeling is security.
Yeah. But females frequently report feeling unsafe or on edge even if they are the overwhelming majority in a room and there is only one male present.
Wait, just one?
Just one. And this isn't an isolated demographic quirk either. The data holds true across age, geography, race, faith, socioeconomic status, everything.
So, I mean, if you are sitting in a meeting right now, look around. The people speaking the most aren't necessarily the ones with the most developed ideas.
No, they are simply the ones who feel the safest taking up space.
Let me push back on this for a second, though. If females are speaking with more brevity and softening their language to navigate the room, isn't that just a stylistic difference in communication?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. Like in a fast-paced business meeting or a crowded classroom, why does brevity actually harm the environment?
Well, what's fascinating here is that brevity, in this specific context, directly limits the expression of divergent or contradictory thinking.
Oh, I see.
Divergent thinking inherently requires risk. You have to be willing to be wrong or, to agitate the consensus of the group.
Right. If you are rushing to finish your point because you feel like you shouldn't be taking up the room's time, you don't explore the nuances.
Exactly. You don't play devil's advocate. You provide the safest, most concise answer possible just to get the spotlight off of you.
But divergent thinking is exactly what prompts higher-order follow-up questions. It's the engine for actual sophisticated discourse.
Instead of a room full of people just nodding in agreement to get the meeting over with.
Yeah, exactly.
See, females are conditioned from a very young age to pause and run a mental calculation on how their comments will make them appear to others in the room.
Like, will I sound bossy?
Will I sound bossy? Will I sound stupid? Will I upset the manager? That mental check creates friction and it slows them down.
While males, on the other hand, are heavily conditioned by society to be aggressive, to take risks, and to act impulsively in group discussions.
The environment literally rewards their impulsivity while demanding caution from females.
And that verbal dominance doesn't happen in a void either. It naturally bleeds into the physical space.
Let's talk about the geography of power in a room.
Oh, this part is so interesting.
Because who speaks is deeply connected to who is physically seen and validated. Let's start with the most basic form of validation: eye contact. Males of all ages statistically receive more eye contact than females in group settings.
Really. Just baseline, more eye contact.
Baseline, if you are leading a room, your eyes are naturally drawn to the people who are projecting that unearned confidence and taking up the auditory space.
So you are likely giving more visual validation to the males without even realizing you're doing it.
Exactly. And the source material maps out how this visual validation literally shapes where people sit. There is a tangible power position in any room.
The power position, I love that term.
People who feel seen, empowered, safe, and accepted unconsciously gravitate to sit to the leader's right.
Specifically in the direct line of sight from the leader's right eye, right?
Yes. And this power position is overwhelmingly dominated by males.
While those feeling invisible or unsafe or who are subconsciously looking to hide, they naturally drift to the leader's left and usually toward the back of the room.
You walk into a room and think you're just picking a random chair near a window or an outlet.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
But you are often playing out a deeply ingrained psychological script about your own perceived power in that community.
And this spatial inequality reinforces a culture of pervasive dismissiveness. The notes bring in this compelling research from Mankowski at Portland State University.
Right, breaking down how dismissiveness actively undercuts female voice and agency.
Mankowski categorizes this into 4 key behaviors. First, the suppression of anything stereotypically feminine. Second, the suppression of vulnerable emotions. Third, male domination over women and other men. And fourth, outright aggression.
The suppression of vulnerable emotions is a perfect example of how this plays out in real time.
How so?
Imagine a team member expressing fear that a project timeline is moving too fast. They feel helpless to stop a potential failure. That's vulnerability.
Right.
If a male colleague responds with an eye roll, a heavy sigh, or like a snicker, it immediately signals to the entire room that vulnerability is a punishable offense.
It totally shuts down the early warning system of the whole team. And these behaviors rarely manifest as, like, HR reportable overt physical acts. We are talking about subtle cuts. Interrupting, laughing off a suggestion, teasing, or simply skipping over a qualified female for a leadership role.
The really insidious part is that males usually don't even notice these behaviors are happening. It barely registers on their radar.
But to the females in the room, the notes say they find these behaviors well-known and completely demoralizing. It's an entirely different lived reality occurring in the exact same room.
I mean, if I'm a manager or a teacher listening to this, my immediate instinct is that I need to start aggressively policing interruptions and calling out the eye rolls.
Yeah, but the source implies the problem is largely geographic.
Ugh.
So what does this actually mean for the person leading the room? Does something as simple as moving around actually dismantle these deeply ingrained dismissive behaviors? Or is that just a Band-Aid on a much bigger psychological wound?
Changing the physical dynamic is actually a highly effective tactical disruption. The source advises leaders to literally redefine the front of the room.
Oh, interesting.
If you always stand in one spot, say at the head of the conference table or behind a podium, the power seating to your right becomes calcified. The same people get the validation, the same people hide in the back left.
Like the Wi-Fi router is bolted to one corner of the room, forever giving the same devices the strongest signal.
That's spot on. But if you rotate the front of the room, if you constantly move your physical position, you actively disrupt the existing power dynamics.
You force equitable eye contact.
Exactly. You are tearing up the geography that makes certain groups feel invisible. Leaders must change the physical environment to mitigate the long-term consequences of girls and women constantly feeling less safe.
Because those subtle cuts, the eye rolls, the geographic isolation, the interrupted sentences, they don't just disappear when the meeting ends.
No, they definitely don't.
The people sitting on the left side of the room carry that invisibility home with them. Let's shift to the internal psychological toll, because these external spatial pressures eventually rewire how students and professionals process expectations.
And we use the word rewire intentionally here. Brain researchers confirm that these behavioral disparities are not congenital biological differences in our brains.
Right. There is no male brain or female brain that inherently prefers interrupting or apologizing.
Society literally influences the rewiring of our brains over time to meet these relentless gender expectations.
The source document frames perfectionism as a direct symptom of this rewiring, and it presents it in a way I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah, it's pretty profound.
Perfectionism is not a drive for excellence. It is described as a form of control exercised by those who feel powerless, unheard, and unseen.
Think about it from the perspective of a young female student trying to navigate a room where she feels geographically and verbally marginalized. On top of that, she's facing overwhelming and often contradictory societal and parental expectations.
She must excel at academics, maintain a certain standard of beauty, navigate complex friendships, succeed in athletics. The pressure is just immense.
It is. And when you feel powerless in the broader geography of your life, you seize control wherever you possibly can.
It's like pulling the emergency brake on a runaway train. Perfectionism isn't about winning the race or being the sleekest train on the tracks. It's simply about stopping the terrifying feeling of losing control.
And if they feel they can't execute something flawlessly, they will often just abandon the task entirely, rather than risk the vulnerability of failing in front of a room that already dismisses them.
That desperate need to grasp control when faced with unrealistic expectations is a direct link to why females struggle with eating disorders more frequently than males.
Yes, it is fundamentally about trying to assert absolute power over one's own life and body when the external world feels completely unyielding and unsafe.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, every single person in that room is suffering from this invisible architecture. All children consume these incredibly narrow limits of what masculinity and femininity are supposed to be.
And as they mature into professionals, they struggle to fit their authentic, complex selves into these tiny, arbitrary boxes.
Right. And they feel a profound sense of failure about the ways they inevitably don't measure up to the stereotypes.
So the intervention has to come from the adults. The leaders, the managers, we have to explicitly reject those harmful expectations. We can't just passively hope they go away.
We have to stop enforcing the rules about body image, or the assumption that women must always be the emotional caretakers of the office, or the shame surrounding sexuality.
We have to give the people we lead the explicit permission to be authentic.
And the notes provide very clear directives for this intervention, right?
They do. Boys need to be actively encouraged to listen, to process their emotions out loud instead of bottling them into aggression, to act as caregivers, and to pause and calculate before they dominate a conversation.
While girls need the exact opposite encouragement. They need to be pushed to speak out, to follow their instincts without immediately offering an apology, to question the assumptions of the room, and to attend to their own needs rather than constantly policing how they appear to the people around them.
But how do you, listening to this deep dive right now, actually audit your own behavior to make this happen? How do you unlearn the programming that makes you favor the right side of the room?
This brings us to self-awareness and Novik's personal reflections in the notes. Let's talk about the labels we assign people and the internal triggers that create them.
The minute you start labeling a colleague or a student in your own head, saying to yourself, oh, they're just rigid, or she's stubborn, he's weak, they're completely checked out, or she's just afraid, that is an immediate red flag.
An internal alarm should be going off.
Exactly. That label is an unconscious trigger inside of you. It's a defensive mechanism closing off your interaction with that person.
The source puts it bluntly. Labeling someone is abdicating your responsibility to the community. You are writing them off instead of doing the hard work to understand the root of their behavior.
And this bias shows up everywhere, especially in the things we choose to praise people for.
The relationship between praise and gender is profound, and it feeds right back into the invisible architecture. Females are overwhelmingly praised for things like their clothing, their hair, their empathy, their patience, and for being good listeners.
While males are consistently praised for risk-taking, strength, determination, resilience, and firmness.
We are literally rewarding them as children for the exact behaviors that allow them to aggressively dominate the bandwidth of the room later in life.
All while rewarding females for quietly listening to them do it.
You have to start tracking who you praise and what you are genuinely praising them for. Are you reinforcing a stereotype to keep the room comfortable, or are you actually seeing the whole person?
Because, and the consultation stressed this heavily, gender isn't always the primary identifier for someone's experience.
People are like complex operating systems. What you see in a meeting, the user interface, is just a tiny fraction of what's going on.
So true.
Below the surface, there are thousands of background processes running simultaneously. It could be their race, religion, ethnicity, physical ability, sexual orientation, or hidden personal struggles.
All of these processes are consuming their internal CPU, and you have no idea they are running.
Which means the language we use must be intentional and inclusive. We must actively avoid false binaries that uphold unjust power differences.
We can't just parrot the easy stereotype phrases we've always heard because they require less processing power on our end.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Novik makes a striking confession in his notes. He admits that knowing all of this data and actually changing your daily behavior are two completely different beasts.
Yeah, self-awareness is hard.
Right. As a self-identified male who grew up in a male-privileged society, he says changing these habits is a lifelong process. It doesn't just happen overnight because you read a study or, listen to a deep dive.
No, it takes constant effort.
But if you are a manager or a teacher feeling totally unequipped to handle a frustrating interaction, how do you actually interrogate your own feelings in the moment?
Well, the methodology from the consultation provides a really clear sequence. Do not assume. When you feel that spike of frustration or you catch yourself applying a label like stubborn, you have to stop. Listen to the person. Ask them a direct question about their perspective. Think about their answer, and then listen again.
Crucially, you have to ask yourself why their specific behavior is making you anxious or angry. Does their divergence threaten your control of the room?
You have to own your part in the dynamic. You have to recognize that your frustration might be a reaction to the invisible rules being broken rather than the person actually doing anything wrong.
We must teach kids and our colleagues where these labels actually come from. We have to help them see that when they label someone, they are assuming they understand far more about that person's complex operating system than they actually do.
Self-awareness, driven by a willingness to be uncomfortable, is literally the only path to positive change here.
So let's bring this all together. We started by noticing the invisible rules of the floor, the Wi-Fi bandwidth that dictates who speaks, who interrupts, and who feels safe taking up space.
We mapped out the physical geography of power, discovering that the seat to the leader's right is an unconscious throne of validation, while dismissiveness hides in the subtle eye rolls and sighs that push people to the back left.
And we followed that spatial exclusion into the internal psychological toll, recognizing that human brains are actively rewired by these environments, leading to the dark side of perfectionism, where control is a desperate response to feeling entirely powerless.
And finally, we confronted our own internal triggers, the biased ways we offer praise, and the hard truth that dismantling this programming is a lifelong process of unlearning.
The ultimate takeaway from Novik's selected notes is that creating equity isn't a passive state you arrive at. It requires the active, conscious, daily disruption of your own programming.
It requires you to constantly move around and redefine the front of your own rooms.
So here is our challenge to you. Tomorrow, when you walk into your next meeting, or sit down in a classroom, or even when you gather in your living room with your family, just observe.
Don't try to fix the dynamic immediately.
Right. Just watch the invisible algorithm run. Notice who naturally gets the most eye contact. Check who automatically gravitates to the right of whoever's leading the conversation.
And pay very close attention to what you personally are genuinely praising people for.
This raises an important question to leave you with. If our brains are literally rewired over time by these societal, spatial, and physical expectations of gender in physical rooms,
How is the massive shift toward remote work and digital classrooms rewiring us right now?
yeah, if the physical front of the room is gone, what replaces it?
Is the unconscious power seat to the leader's right becoming obsolete on a Zoom grid? Or are we just quietly inventing entirely new, invisible ways to dismiss each other in the digital space?
Who gets the digital bandwidth? Who gets pinned to the main screen? Who feels empowered to interrupt the speaker? Who feels safe enough to drop a divergent thought into the chat? And who keeps their camera off entirely to hide in the digital back left?
The physical room might be shifting, but the invisible architecture is almost certainly finding a new place to lay its foundation.
It is something to really chew on next time you log on.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible rules around you.
Until next time, keep looking deeper.